October 16, 2020, wealthy Jamaican businessman Hamancho Hilton is minding his own business outside of his popular smoke shop in America, thinking about his loving wife when all of a sudden his life changes forever. A man in a dark hoodie emerges from nowhere and out of his waistband pulls a gun. The man proceeds to open fire, and as Hamancho is hit, the shooter runs away and leaves him to fall on the ground in pain and spiraling into confusion as to who could be trying to end his life. But fortunately for him, the bullet did not pierce any vital organs. All he needed was one phone call to the police and his life would have been saved. And he thought everything was fine when he saw footsteps approaching, and feeling even more joy when he realized that the person coming to his aid was his wife. Baby, call 911. He frantically pleaded as he relied on his partner for help. But it was as his wife reached into her bag and he thought everything was going to be fine that what she pulled out was in fact not a cell phone, but instead a gun of her own. And moments later, witnesses would report seeing Hamancho Hilton's body flat on the ground. By the time police arrived on the scene, everybody was shocked, wondering who could possibly do this to Hamancho. But nobody cried louder than his own wife, who was appalled that her husband was now dead on the ground, painting a version of events that would make your jaw drop. But regardless of what she said, nothing was more surprising than the actual truth. A reality so dark that hearing it may possibly leave you never viewing human beings the same again. And it all started from long before the hundreds of thousands of dollars or the notoriety, where young Hamancho Hilton would meet a woman named Tamika. He was Jamaican and she was from Trinidad, and by the time they were barely into their 20s, these two were married. The kind of young sweetheart couple that everybody saw as the fairy tale ending. Hamancho was the type of man who threw himself fully into whatever he loved, and what he loved was his wife. And what he also loved was money, which is why he was a hustler in the truest sense. And the second he realized that Brooklyn was not giving him what he wanted financially, he decided to pack up shop and take a leap of faith with the person he loved the most. But little did he know that as he would embark on this financial journey, the love he thought would take him to the top would become his biggest poison. At some point, the couple would eventually leave New York and relocate all the way out to Arizona, a place he would decide was best suited for his Jamaican talents, because what better is a Jamaican at selling than that good stuff? And so he would waste no time in opening his smoke shop, and slowly but surely it started to take off. The foreigners would find his products unlike anything else, and the money started to come in. As the business grew, so did his lifestyle. He upgraded their cars, bought a house, and most importantly above everything else, he made sure his wife Tamika was always dressed to the T. She always had what she needed, and best believe he was not shy about showing it either, because every night, every event, and every little thing they did, he posted it on his social media for the world to see his happy relationship. This was a man who was head over heels in his wife, and to anyone scrolling past, they would say this as the Caribbean couple that successfully went to America, had nothing but a dream and built this life from scratch. But life is often very different behind the scenes, so much so that even the very person in the pictures themselves, Hamancho, did not realize he was living in an illusion. Because somewhere in the midst of all of this success, as the years would go by and the size of the figures would continue to increase, something in this relationship would begin to shift. And it was not Hamancho, it was his wife. Because while he thought he was falling in love in his fairy tale, she was falling into the arms and onto the penis of somebody else. That's right, somewhere along the line, she started giving him bun. But this was under the quiet. Even if she had secretly begun to resent the relationship, she knew that this was her lifeline and potentially access to future millions of dollars. And so as the business kept growing, so did their marriage on the surface. The house got bigger, the social media posts got nicer, and a daughter even came into the picture, with him posting his daughter all the time online, but not knowing that there were actually a few people who were thinking that the child didn't even look like him. But you know what, as wicked as this is, at least up until this point, we could say that things are not that far out of the norm. Lots of people get cheated on all the time, but this woman decided that that was not enough. The evil in her heart extended to a level that only reaches a specific 0.001% of the population. And despite the fact that he was still showing her off to the world, she had decided in her heart that every single thing he had worked for was really by right hers. And there would come a point where this would reach to a level that became uncontrollable. By 2020, Hamancho's business was doing amazing enough that he made the decision most responsible family men make once they've got something that's actually worth protecting. He took out a life insurance policy reportedly worth around $500,000. Now, for those of you who don't know what life insurance is, it's basically a subscription plan that you pay every month or year, so that if at any point while you're subscribed to this plan you happen to pass away, the insurance company agrees that, hey, since you're one of our loyal customers, we will pay your your family millions of dollars so that they don't have to suffer after you pass away. To most people who don't have a family, this policy seems useless because you'll never see the money until you're already in the grave. But to somebody who is the main breadwinner of their family and wants them to be good no matter what happens to them, this is the perfect policy for their life. But unfortunately, this selfless act of love and care was taken as the fuel needed by the evil demon lurking in the shadows. Because the moment she heard that her husband had taken out life insurance, the screws in her brain started to get just a little bit looser. Because what Hamancho did not know in the background was that his wife was not just cheating on him, but building an entirely separate life behind the scenes with another man. But there was one thing they needed before they could kick their new life into action. And to Tamika, she had just found her golden goose. And she would devise a plan with her new boyfriend that would leave the hearts of many Caribbean people sick. Shortly after the life insurance policy, on October 16, 2020, Hamancho Hilton was standing outside of his smoke shop that he built from nothing, minding his business in the parking lot that represented everything he'd worked for since leaving New York. But what he didn't know was that his wife was also in the vicinity. She lifted her phone and sent a text to her other man that would leave people with chills down their spine. "He's here outside. You think I could pull this off?" To which the man responded with no hesitation, "You've got to do it. You gotta get this money so you can move." If it wasn't already clear what they were planning, this was the confirmation. And it was around this point that Hamancho, standing in the parking lot, would notice something not far from his person. In the parking lot right next door, separated by nothing but a thin chain fence, there was a man in a dark hoodie standing and waiting. And then out of absolutely nowhere, he heard something that made his bones shake. Just for a bit of context, Hamancho had another name back home that was only used by his close friends and family. They referred to him as Macho. And in the midst of him standing in this parking lot, he heard an unfamiliar voice coming from the dark hoodie saying, "Yo, Macho," which immediately made his heart beat and he was forced to pay attention. He didn't know who this person was, but he figured it had to be somebody that he knew. And so he turned around now in full view of this person. But little did he know this was a deadly mistake, because it was at this point that the man would lift his weapon and with no hesitation open fire. One swift gunshot pierced through the air and ended up in Hamancho's side. In nothing but shock and confusion, he looked down, feeling the pain. But another thing I forgot to mention was that Hamancho was a big guy, a tall man, and in the adrenaline and confusion of this random wound, it did not land in vital enough of an area for him to actually go down. And so once the shooter saw this, especially since he was really not built for this life, he saw that Hamancho had not gone down, and out of fear, he ran away. Whether because he was scared his face would be seen, or he was just a little fool who had never had any real experience in this field. But he left the scene of the crime, leaving Hamancho to potentially survive. As far as most people would be concerned, this would be a blessing, because as much as he was still confused and bleeding in broad daylight, at the very least his chances of actually dying were not that great. All he needed was just to make one call to the police and he would have been in a hospital. And it was in this moment where all he needed was just one call that he would miraculously hear footsteps walking toward him. And when he looked up at the face of who it was, his heart leapt into the happiest and most hopeful state it could possibly be in, because the person who had come to save him was none other than his own beautiful wife. To him, there couldn't be a better person, and he was thanking God that he would finally be safe. But it was at this moment, when he would call to her and begin to tell her what terrible thing had just happened, that he would see her reach into her bag and out pulled a Smith & Wesson Colt revolver. And before he even had time to process the events unfolding, she raised the weapon to his head and pulled the trigger. Hamancho Hilton was killed, and the person he loved the most in the world stood there as he fell over onto the pavement. By the time the police got there, Tamika had her story ready. She told them that she'd been inside the shop the entire time and that she randomly heard the gunfire from outside. And by the time she ran outside and got there, her husband was already on the ground and gone. The police would console a grieving, frightened wife as she would cry and scream about the injustice that was done. But the evidence itself would tell a completely different story that Tamika did not account for. Investigators would find blood on the door, the floors smeared across counters, and a trail that suggested that after Hamancho was shot by the first guy and was walking around seeking for help, he actually managed to make it back inside briefly, leaving his DNA around the place before making it back outside. But more so than anything else, Tamika, with her low IQ, did not even for a second account for the fact that during her murder, she and her husband were not the only ones present on the scene. That's right, she was seen by multiple witnesses, people watching from an adjacent property far enough that neither Tamika nor the man in the hoodie would ever know that they were being watched. One witness even reported that he was in the bushes watching this all happen, and when he saw the shooter raise his gun, he ducked down low in fear of his own life. And none of the witnesses could believe what they were seeing when they saw this man's own wife come up to him and end it all. The police now had the full story, and multiple people were giving them a completely different account of events than anything Tamika was saying. And that's when they decided to search the dreaded place that would send many people to jail if it were searched, her phone. And lo and behold, and they saw the text that said, "Do you think I can pull this off?" Upon doing this and then looking in her purse to find an empty holster, the police wasted no time in arresting Tamika Hilton and charging her with first-degree murder. It was then exposed that her plan was to kill her husband, benefit from the life insurance money, and then use it to move away to a completely different state and start a life with this man, the same man that investigators believe was the man in the hoodie. And because of this, she was booked into jail and held without bond. And no matter how much happened legally, she never gave up the name of the man in the hoodie, a man that she was clearly more loyal to than her own husband. But interestingly enough, despite this loyalty, as she rots in jail for her crimes, this man is very likely buried deep inside of some other woman, not giving a single shit about her existence. And now this woman is in jail with her child being raised by somebody else, ended up with no money, and lost a man who actually poured his life into making sure that she was good, so much so that it ended up killing him. Rest in peace to Hamantro Hilton, and I sincerely hope that the family gets the justice that they deserve. And crazily enough, there is actually another Jamaican woman who was even more evil than Tamika, a woman who was so insane over somebody she wasn't even with that when she found out her ex had moved on to a new girl, she flew 1,000 miles just to go to Florida, track her down, and end her life with 37 stab wounds. And if you want to learn about the full story of Sakina Thompson and how that case unfolded, click the video on your screen right now. Subscribe to the channel for more content, and as always, this case has been decoded.